So in the last episode, we talked about rotation coming along and started taking into consideration some of the things that are going to be changing about the game. And I mean, I haven't changed shirts since. I'm a disgusting mess. I'm trying to collect data. It's disgusting. I smell like heck. No, I'm just kidding. This is just a filming process. So we're going to talk about collecting data as a whole. And what that means and what that entails is maximizing the database in your head, as it were, on peak performance in the grand meta game. So when we enter this fresh game, this fresh post-rotation world, we have to consider what stands out. Believe me, when it comes down to it, HC Realms is a great tool for this. I know I tout them a lot, and I can't say it enough. It's a great tool that allows you to isolate the information that you need, and it does allow you to limit to age. Now, unfortunately, right now, at the time of filming this, they don't have a post-rotation update because rotation doesn't happen until June. So we have to hold off on that. But it's not to say we can't go set by set, because there's still, when we get into a pre-rotation world, we know what the oldest set is going to be in this post-rotation, in the post-rotation world, and we know then what sets exist, and that's going to be the smallest data packet to work off of. So what we do is we take what we know, the sets that we have, and start finding the highs, as it were. And then when we find the highs, we have to find what the high points are attached to. This is all part of that min-maxing thing I talked about many moons ago. But it's time to actually start learning how to read the entire game, because it's one thing to plan a team and plan its functionality, but you got to plan around what the world, what exists in the world, because that is your, well, how do I deal with this situation? Because that's another thing we've covered in the past too. So discovering your how do I deal with situations, you always want to find the high things. One of the first things a lot of people take into account is the range on your team. Can it be outranged? Can you outrange another team? Well, what is the highest range and what is the highest range attached to? Technically, I believe the two highest range characters are at a range of 10. I could be wrong. There might be something higher. But really, that's like the drummer and the Unimind. So we know the Unimind is fairly strong, but we know that there's been a fluctuation in his use. He's no longer a 60 to 70% saturation rate in tournaments. He's probably closer to a 20-30% rate, where shredders are now taking the place of what the Unimind used to take up in the whole of the game. So when I say let's look at this high range, let's talk about this a little bit. What information are we gleaning from this? Well, what does the drummer do with that 10 range? Not quite as much damage as the Unimind, but you do have to consider that threat. I personally believe anybody overlooking him right now is fooling themselves, and in this game that we're heading into right now, it's probably worth it to keep him in mind for whatever team you're building. We do enter a world where certain themes do have help as well, but that's another episode I want to talk about in the next one. So when you look at that range, okay, so how do we deal with that? These characters specifically, do I have to functionally change my team? I'm not going to give you the answer on this. These are the questions you're asking when you collect this data. So, you got your range situations, but then you go down in your ranges until you start to meet your own range, and then also include your running shots for your reach. Because range and reach are two different things, right? If I have a range of 10 but no running shot, but I have a range of 8, and I do have an 8 movement with running shot, I've got a 12 reach versus a 10 square reach, right? So unless I add something like telekinesis or a way to give this character sidestep, I'm not beating out this 8 range with 4 movement running shot, right? I'm going to get the jump with this guy. So these are the kinds of things you're thinking about. So range is a big one. Defenses. What's the high defense in the market right now? I believe 19 is actually the sitting high when you get into the post-rotation competitive game. Currently, I believe 20 is sitting on the Green Lantern. But also don't discount 18s at range with energy shield, 18s at close combat with combat reflexes, depending on the team you're building. You got to be aware of these things. So, when you're looking up your data, what are the high defenses? Okay, these are the high defenses, but what other ones exist at a lower value that can match that in situations that are not ideal for your team. So if they're, you know, high defense or close combat because they have close combat combat reflexes, you need to adjust for that. How do you adjust for that? Increase your attack values. That's a conversation we have to have in another episode as well. So this is the data collection you're starting to do. And then you look into movements and how many of those high movements can carry? How many of those high movements have hypersonic? How many of these high movements have these problems? This is the data collection you need to be doing. Making yourself aware of what's out there. Sometimes you have to also take into account a character that could very well, your friends tell you it'll never show up. Well, that's fine if I can outpace its defense in these particular situations. That means if anything comes with higher in those values, I am now in a winning situation, right? So, you know, if Drummer isn't going to show up, you don't think, can you still deal with a 10 range character like him? That's a question, one of those questions that you got to that will help your data collection, right? Because it's not just a matter of get the data, do nothing with it, and just be aware of these problems. That's my old problem. That's what I used to do. It's like, I'm going to play this. I don't care if it doesn't do well. I know these things exist. I'm going to try to play around it. I'm getting out of that mindset. I'm now going to go into the mindset of, can I beat it with something that does X? And therein lies some of the answers I got to deal with as far as building. So when you're collecting your data, being aware of the competitive game, in a world where a competitive game is not yet defined, start to look at the min-maxes of the entirety of the game first. Let the game kind of define itself in some tournaments, but do understand we have a game that's on a smaller scale than a lot of other games. So what will happen is a lot of the times our competitive game, our copycatting, as it were, our net decking, will come from a much smaller pool than any other type of game. And that's, you know, if a team stands out in a group of 24 versus a group of 1,000, there's a lot of questions you have to ask yourself as far as that small scale. How many other possible combinations could have beaten that? Can you come up with something that deals with that? And this is all part of that practice thing that we definitely preach on this show. So do understand that data collection comes from a lot of places, and the first place it should be is looking at things yourself. That's the first state of data collection. Second state is, of course, finding out what happens in the game, and then accumulating the data on both ends and working your way through that. So, boring episode. I use the word data a lot to make myself sound smart, I'm sure. But, you know, these are the kinds of thought processes I have to start going through in order to make myself a better player and do better this year in the game of Heroclix. So, with that said, thank you guys for watching. Start filling your heads full of all those numbers, all those threats, all those ideas, because it's really going to be useful to help you with your team building it and practicing with it. And don't forget to practice, because it will make that team better.